Bass Reeves. Born a slave in 1838 Arkansas, Bass Reeves grew up in Lamar and Grayson counties in Texas, where he was the property of future Texas legislator Colonel George R. Reeves. Escaping north into Indian Territory, Reeves learned the ways of the Cherokee, Creek, and Seminole people before serving as a foot soldier with the Union Indian Home Guard during the Civil War. Settling as a farmer in Van Buren, Arkansas at war's end, due to his extensive knowledge of the Indian Territory, like a cook knows her kitchen, he once boasted, Reeves found lucrative employment as a guide and tracker for peace officers in search of desperados, thieves, and murderers rampant in the territory. After hanging Judge Isaac C. Parker took over the federal court at Fort Smith in 1875, based on Reeves' proven effectiveness in apprehending criminals in the Indian Territory, the judge commissioned Reeves as a deputy U.S. Marshal, making him one of the earliest African-American lawmen west of the Mississippi. While towns like Tombstone, Deadwood, and Dodge City have come to embody the image of the Wild West, all these towns stayed wild for no more than 4 or 5 years, while Indian Territory towns like Fort Reno, Fort Sill, Anadarko, and in particular Muskogee remained wild for well over 40 years, costing the lives of 130 U.S. Marshals out of a total Western loss of 200. And while the average U.S. Marshal generally stayed on the job for one 4-year term, Reeves signed on for an astounding 32 years in one of the most dangerous jobs in the early West, the only deputy to begin with Parker's court and work until Oklahoma gained statehood in 1907. Becoming a celebrity in his lifetime, Muskogee Police Chief Bud Ledbetter was once quoted as saying that Reeves never quailed in facing any man. Becoming an expert marksman with both pistol and rifle, territory newspapers claim that he killed 14 outlaws over the course of his career, which would sometimes take Reeves, his cook, and a posseman on 800-mile round trips into the more than 75,000 square miles that made up the Indian Territory. According to the November 28, 1901 edition of the Chickasaw Enterprise, the paper claimed that Reeves had arrested more than 3,000 men and women for violating federal laws in the territory. He passed away on January 12, 1910, just 3 years after Oklahoma became a state, making the life and devotion of Bass Reeves an unsung hero of the American West. Billy the Kid. Born Henry McCarty in 1859 New York City, Billy the Kid was raised by a single mother in Wichita, Kansas, until she died of tuberculosis when Billy was just 14 years old. His first arrest came in 1875, when he stole clothing from a Chinese laundry, but rather than face justice, he shimmied up a jailhouse chimney and fled to Arizona, where he killed his first man in a barroom gunfight. Assuming the aliases of William Wright and William Bonney, Billy the Kid earned his reputation as a gunslinger during the Lincoln County War of 1878, when rancher John Tunstall set up a competing business against a local dry goods and cattle trading monopoly owned by 2 Irish immigrants. Bankrolled by Tunstall, Billy the Kid joined a vigilante group known as the Regulators, who murdered Lincoln County Sheriff William Brady after the sheriff organized a posse that led to Tunstall's death. Unlike other Wild West outlaws like Jesse James or Butch Cassidy, Billy the Kid never robbed a bank or a train or even a stagecoach, but rather focused his efforts on cattle rustling in New Mexico and Arizona. Known for his easygoing manner, between 1877 and 1881, the baby-faced gunslinger felled 9 men in a stretch of largely saloon-related gunfights, including a drunk named Joe Grant, who threatened patrons in a New Mexico saloon. "That's a mighty fine-looking 6-shooter you got," Billy said to the man, slipping Grant's gun from its holster before spinning the cylinder to an empty next round. Later that night, Grant fired his pistol at Kid's back, and when the weapon failed to go off, Kid turned from his poker hand before ending Grant's life with a single shot to the chest. In late 1880, Lincoln County Sheriff Pat Garrett tracked Kid to his hideout in Stinking Springs, New Mexico, taking Kid into custody before the outlaw was found guilty in a court of law for the murder of Sheriff William Brady. Scheduled to be hanged on April 28, 1881, Kid murdered 2 guards during a trip to an outhouse, escaping yet again to make Billy the Kid the most wanted man in the West. Spending the next several months on the run, Sheriff Garrett caught up with Kid at the home of rancher Peter Maxwell, ending the life of the 21-year-old outlaw when one of Garrett's 2 shots pierced Kid's heart. Since his death, Billy the Kid's life and likeness has been cast in some 50 spaghetti westerns and TV series, making the short yet violent life of Billy the Kid the stuff of gunslinger legend in the bygone days of the American Wild West. Bonnie and Clyde. During the hardscrabble days of the Great Depression, gangsters like John Dillinger and Pretty Boy Floyd captured the public's attention with their brazen violence and matinee idol good looks, until a shootout with police in 1933 Joplin, Missouri, elevated Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow to near superstar status due to their youthful good looks and lengthy track record of murder, armed robbery, and outright contempt for the law. Together with Clyde's brother Buck and Buck's wife Blanche, along with a handful of off-again, on-again Barrow gang members, the group of outlaws evaded capture by stealing fast cars and traveling about the American South and Midwest, playing a game of cat and mouse that stymied the efforts of law enforcement as the criminals moved rapidly between jurisdictions. Responsible for the deaths of 9 law enforcement officers and 4 civilians over the course of their criminal careers, Bonnie and Clyde's luck began to change in the summer of 1933, after their narrow escape from a number of shootouts spanning multiple state lines. While held up in an abandoned amusement park at Dexfield Park, Iowa, the Barrow gang engaged in a gunfight with a posse made up of civilians and police, leading to the capture of Blanche, 16-year-old W.D. Jones, and Buck, who passed from his injuries 5 days later. Bonnie and Clyde were also shot, Bonnie in the abdomen and Clyde in an arm, but yet again the couple managed a nail-biting escape. The end would come in 1934, after Clyde sought revenge for his mistreatment at Eastham Prison some 4 years earlier, leading to the death of 1 prison guard while seriously injuring another. Public outcry was to follow, leading Prison Superintendent Lee Simmons to appoint former Texas Ranger Frank Hamer to pursue Bonnie and Clyde without concern for the limits of jurisdiction or geography. Responding to a tip, Hamer and 5 others waited 2 full days on a lonely road near Gibbsland, Louisiana, until the morning of May 23rd, when the couple was lured into an ambush that ended their lives with a lethal vengeance. After the shooting was over, investigators counted 167 bullet holes in the couple's stolen car, while coroners counted 53 bullet wounds to Bonnie and 51 to Clyde, making the short lives of Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow a Hollywood favorite over the years to come. Calamity Jane. Born Martha Jane Canary in 1852 Missouri, her mother passed away from pneumonia after the family moved by wagon train to Virginia City, Montana, followed by her father's passing after a move to Salt Lake City in 1866. Orphaned by age 14, Martha Jane took control of her 5 younger siblings, and after a move to Piedmont in the Wyoming Territory, she worked as a dishwasher, cook, waitress, dance hall girl, ox team driver, and a prostitute. While the self-described origins of her nickname have been contested following her claim to have served in military conflicts during the Indian Wars, what is known for certain is that her nickname was cemented by 1876 in Deadwood's newspaper, the Black Hills Pioneer, when a headline read, "Calamity Jane has arrived with the Wild Bill Hickok wagon train." Known as a frontierswoman, sharpshooter, and a lurid storyteller, Calamity Jane was also known as a raging alcoholic. She also had a reputation as an on-again, off-again prostitute due to her friendship with Dora Dufran, the Black Hills' leading madam in the heart of the American Wild West. Purportedly married to Wild Bill Hickok for a time, Calamity Jane was known to have 2 daughters, although their father's identity remains unknown. In the late 1880s, Jane held a benefit in Deadwood to raise money for one of her daughter's education at St. Martin's Academy in Sturgis, South Dakota. And while the benefit raised a large sum of money, Jane got drunk and spent much of it on a Deadwood bender before she and the child left the next day. In 1881, Jane bought a ranch near Miles City, Montana, along the Yellowstone River, which she turned into an inn. By 1883, Calamity Jane made her first appearances in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show as a storyteller, later appearing in the 1901 Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. Despite a rough-and-tumble persona as a woman of the Wild West, she also had her softer side when she saved passengers in an overland stagecoach under attack by Plains Indians. After stagecoach driver John Slaughter was felled by the Indians, Jane took control of the reins and safely steered the coach into Deadwood. In late July of 1903, Jane traveled by ore train to Terry, South Dakota, where she took ill after a bout of heavy drinking while on board the train. A bartender secured her a room at the Callaway Hotel, and after a doctor was summoned, she passed away from pneumonia on August the 1st. She would soon be buried next to Hickok at the Mount Moriah Cemetery in South Dakota. And while before his death, Hickok had stated that he had absolutely no use for Jane, the 4 men who oversaw her funeral buried her next to him as a posthumous joke on Wild Bill Hickok, forever cementing Calamity Jane into the folklore of the American Wild West. Wyatt Earp. Born in 1848 Monmouth, Illinois, when the American Civil War broke out in 1861, Wyatt Earp ran away from his family farm to fight for the Union Army, only to be brought home by his father before Wyatt could enlist. After the Earps moved to San Bernardino, California by wagon train, Wyatt married Urilla Sutherland in early 1870, losing her to typhoid before the year was out. Devastated by the loss, Wyatt drifted to Dodge City, Kansas, known as the wickedest little city in the West, befriending well-known gunman and gambler Doc Holliday before taking on the job of town marshal from 1875 to 1876. Leaving Dodge City in 1879 with his longtime companion and former prostitute Mattie Blaylock, Wyatt teamed up with his brother and town marshal Virgil Earp in Tombstone, Arizona, which was then a lawless boomtown in the midst of a silver rush. In March of 1881, while in hot pursuit of a group of outlaws who robbed a stagecoach, Wyatt struck a deal with local rancher Ike Clanton, who said he had ties to the outlaws. But when Clanton turned against the Earps, the situation quickly escalated to the now infamous gunfight at OK Corral. During the standoff, Doc Holliday and the Earp brothers, Virgil, Morgan, and Wyatt, faced off against the Clanton gang, including Ike and his brother Billy, plus Tom and Frank McLaury. And while Morgan, Virgil, and Holliday were all wounded in the 1-minute gun battle, Billy and the McLaurys were killed. Following the gunfight, including drop murder charges for Wyatt. Virgil and Morgan were shot by unknown assailants in 2 separate revenge attacks, taking the life of Morgan before Wyatt wisely moved farther west. Settling in California with Josephine Marcus for the next 40 years, Wyatt pursued a multitude of careers, including gambling, saloon keeping, mining, and real estate speculation, passing away in Los Angeles on January 13th of 1929 at 80 years of age. When author Stuart Lake published Wyatt's first major biography in 1931, entitled Wyatt Earp, Frontier Marshal, the wildly successful book established Wyatt Earp as a folk hero for millions of Americans during the hardscrabble years of the Great Depression, spawning movies and TV series about Wyatt's life, which starred such A-list actors as Henry Fonda, James Garner, and Kevin Costner, making the life and adventures of Wyatt Earp a leading figurehead during the mythic days of the American Wild West. Shootout at OK Corral. Following the Arizona Silver Strike of 1877, Tombstone quickly grew into one of the richest mining towns in the American West, attracting the likes of Doc Holliday and the Earp brothers, Wyatt, Morgan, and Virgil, to the bustling and sometimes lawless desert community, along with outlaw cattle rustlers, thieves, and murderers like the Clanton and McClory brothers. A former Dodge City peace officer, Wyatt worked as a bank security guard, while his brothers Morgan and Virgil were Tombstone marshals. And when Ike Clanton and Tom McClory rode into Tombstone for supplies on the morning of October 25, 1881, the 2 cattle ranching outlaws had multiple violent run-ins with the Earps and Doc Holliday. Itching for a fight against the law and order brothers of Tombstone, the following afternoon, Billy Clanton, Frank McClory, and Billy Claiborne rode into town to round out the Clayton-McClory gang. And when the new arrivals strode into a local saloon for refreshments, Holliday was more than happy to inform them that their brothers had both been pistol-whipped in a fight with the Earps. Vowing revenge for their brothers, the 5-man gang met up at OK Corral at the end of Fremont Street, and when the Earps and Holliday spotted the gang around 3 p.m., the now famous gunfight at OK Corral exploded into a 30-second fusillade of gunfire. While historians continue the debate about who fired the first shot, Sheriff and eyewitness John Behan of Cochise County testified that Virgil Earp drew his sidearm and shot Billy Clanton point blank in the chest, while Holliday did the same to Tom McClory with a shotgun. Wyatt then shot Frank McClory in the stomach, while Frank and Billy managed to squeeze off a few shots before collapsing, wounding Virgil, Morgan, and Holliday, before Ike Clanton and Billy Claiborne fled for the hills. After Billy Clanton and the McClory brothers died from their injuries, in the aftermath to follow, Sheriff Behan initially charged the Earps and Holliday with murder until a Tombstone judge found the men not guilty a month later, ruling that their actions were fully justified in committing these homicides, making the shootout at OK Corral a high-water moment in the storied annals of Wild West folklore. Jesse James and the Wild West. In the mid to late 1800s, Wild West outlaws soon became romanticized when their stories hit the pages of early American tabloids and dime store novels, which portrayed the men as underdogs who fit the American frontier ideals of gutsy individualism and pioneering rebel spirit. Born in Clay County, Missouri in 1847, an area known as Little Dixie in the western part of the state, Jesse James grew up in a slave-owning family who supported the Confederate cause. And when Jesse was a teenager in 1864, he and his brother Frank became members of a guerrilla outfit known as bushwhackers, who murdered dozens of Union soldiers, leading some historians to speculate that his post-war anger over the South's defeat led to his violent career robbing trains, stagecoaches, and banks. By his own admission, Jesse saw himself as a modern-day Robin Hood who took from the rich and gave to the poor, although no evidence exists that he ever gave money to anyone outside his immediate family. According to the State Historical Society of Missouri, the James Younger gang worked a broad swatch of territory, from Iowa to Texas, and even as far east as West Virginia. From 1860 to 1882, the James Younger gang committed more than 20 bank and train robberies, pocketing an estimated $200,000, or approximately $4 million in today's inflated currency. When newspapers began reporting on the renegade band of outlaws, Jesse's thirst for public attention became insatiable, while his ever-widening legend was fueled by the help of newspaper editor John Newman Edwards, who was responsible for perpetuating Jesse's Robin Hood comparisons thanks to Jesse's own words. "We are not thieves, we are bold robbers," Jesse wrote in a letter to Edwards that was later published. "I am proud of the name, for Alexander the Great was a bold robber, and Julius Caesar and Napoleon Bonaparte." His downfall began in earnest in 1881, when Missouri Governor Thomas Crittenden offered a $10,000 reward, roughly $200,000 in today's money, for the capture of Jesse and Frank James. On April 3, 1882, Jesse was shot and killed by Robert Ford, who was a new recruit to the James Younger gang. Having been promised amnesty for their prior crimes if they successfully brought in Jesse James, Robert and his brother Charles surrendered themselves to legal authorities, but were dismayed when they were charged with first-degree murder. In the course of a single day, the Ford brothers were indicted and sentenced to death by hanging, only to be granted a full pardon 2 hours later by Governor Crittenden himself.